I'm happy to have with us today Dr. Ramya Ranganathan. She has a B.Tech in electronics from IIT Madras, a PGDM from IIM Ahmedabad, and a PhD in organizational behavior from London Business School. Ramya's name features in the top 15 innovators in higher education in India, as per MHRD of the Govt of India. She combines her corporate world experience gained in ICICI, Citibank and Infosys with her academic and research experience being a faculty at IIM Bangalore for over a decade to help individuals and organizations transform. Welcome, Ramya.
Thank you, Suman. Pleasure to be here.
Great. I'm really excited to talk about a very interesting topic today, which is embodying joy at work. We've been talking about this, and somehow, based on what we have seen, while joy, happiness, enjoyment is important and has a direct correlation with employee engagement, somehow it is often perceived to be of lesser importance to results. So what's your view on that?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Great question. So I think there are multiple answers to the same question, and I'm just going to touch upon a few key points. So the first one is that people are actually uneducated about the science of happiness. So it's really, we are not educated about how the brain functions. We are not educated about how we as human beings function. So clearly, nobody is debating that when we work, when most, and I won't generalize this to everyone, but when most organizations create an organization, when leaders create an organization, there is a purpose and it is related to some kind of performance. So performance and productivity are of very great interest. Now, what we are not educated about is what is the connection between performance, productivity, and our happiness or enjoyment of us as human beings, because we are not machines at the end of the day. And that is where neuroscience comes in. That's where the field of positive psychology comes in. That's where years in, if 2 decades of research has to be trusted, there is a very strong correlation between enjoyment or how we feel and the way we work. Now, a 2-line or 3-line summary of that would be, if you just look at the way the brain is wired, and again, this is where neuroscience comes in, you see that when we are in certain emotional states, there are certain circuits, or certain parts, or certain models of our brain that actually take predominance. For example, there's something called the Broaden and Build theory that shows that when we are happy, the way our brain processes our bounded awareness, our awareness, or the number of data points that our brain is receptive to actually broadens. So that's the broaden part. B, the way our brain processes information, which is the sense-making part, is also different, which means when I'm happier, I'm actually more likely to see the forest rather than the trees, to identify patterns and process information differently. So these are just few. I'm touching the tip of the iceberg here. Okay, so these are tangible benefits. So you can actually understand. Okay, other things if you want to know. For example, when I'm happy, there are certain hormones that are released in my brain and body also. But these hormones, so for example, take an example of dopamine. What it does is it turns on the learning centers as well, which means I can learn more about the context that I'm operating in, learn more about the work that I'm doing. And as I think we know, there is a relationship between learning and performance again. So this is the indirect way in which enjoyment or being happy, our emotional state actually translates into performance. Then of course, there are all those other what we often tend to talk about as superficial benefits, but they're real benefits in the business world. For example, you go into a negotiation and you're happy. The person sitting across the table, that person's brain is also wired to see you as someone more trustworthy, someone that they'd like to do business with, someone that they want to engage with. And then there's something called mirror neurons. So that person comes into a nice, relaxed, open mindset. And therefore, you're going to have a different set of outcomes in your negotiations, which is going to translate into your tangible business deal or outcome. So the research here has been done on different levels. At one level, it's on the neuroscience. It's about how our brain works, processes information. At the interpersonal level, on mirror neurons. There are also a bunch of studies that are done, not looking at the why and how it happens, but just looking at the correlations, right? priming people to be in certain emotional states and then getting them to do tasks and seeing the connection. So for example, you prime doctors to be in a certain emotional state and get them to do diagnosis and see, okay, what percentage of these are right diagnoses or wrong diagnoses? Or there is research that looks again at negotiations, at sales, at, tangible business indicators. So to cut a long story short, there is a strong positive correlation between happiness, joy, anger, whatever, right? Emotions that we experience and our performance and productivity. So at one level, it's just the lack of education and information about this, because of which we tend to undermine our happiness. There are more, but I think I'll stop here and let's see, where you want to go with this.
Yeah, yeah. No, I can completely relate to that in some of my experiences. Let me narrate a small one. The other day, we were doing a training session. It was more like a workshop where we were talking about cultures. And of the different values we were looking at, but in that framework, we were looking at different values. And one of the values was enjoyment. And in the assessment, it came at the lowest level of all the values. Okay. But one of the comments that somebody made was that, hey, we're doing pretty well. And the only one where we're not doing so well is enjoyment, which is okay. Right. And that got me thinking. It's almost like in our head, we perceive it to be of lesser importance, in spite of all those things that you're saying that, absolutely makes sense. And frankly, in the way I look at it, earlier, it wouldn't matter if you're in a typical industrial economy, but the moment we're getting into knowledge-based work, where the creativity becomes important, I think that the joy will again become very important. So I completely agree with you, but I'm just thinking, how do we change that perception? Because there seems to be a perception, and I'm sure you'll agree with me all across that it's something like not a must-have, but a good to have. Any views on that?
Yes, a lot of views. And in fact, I think it's a must-have. The fact it should be a must-have, and you're saying it. So to going back to this, the example that you narrated, it's very beautiful, because when you say we ourselves undermine the importance of enjoyment. So just personally, I'm just going to take a personal example here. In my own life, in my own work, I was doing that as well. But again, when I got my hands and brain deep into the science of positive psychology, I was just, no, this is not going to happen. Like before I enter a class, which is sort of the work I do, or a workshop, I started monitoring my own state, my own emotional state. How am I feeling? Because I know that if I enter the class feeling A versus in feeling B, that's going to be a huge determinant in how the class unfolds, which is my performance. And therefore, I take that extra pain and attention to do what I can to change, to manage my own emotions. So I really started so I'm someone who loves performance. I love productivity. I love efficiency. And I do believe that happiness is important in and of itself. I really do. But I had fallen to the same mental models that a lot of us have fallen into, which is that it's performance. And that's where I think the science of happiness actually started changing that circuit in my brain and saying, okay, even if the only thing I care about is performance, because now I know my performance is going to go up if I'm like 99% of the people who have been studied. And I know that my performance stands a better chance of going up if I manage my emotions. I'm going to manage my emotions, okay? Almost in a very matlabi way, if I may put it. Now, that said, I do want to take a step back, and this also correlates to, what Suman you said about the industrial age versus where we're going.
Yeah.
Right? And if I really, really look within, and if I ask myself, did it matter? Did happiness matter even in the industrial age? I would say yes. Does it matter? As long as it's a human being. Happiness matters to my doggy. It matters to every person. It is very central to our existence. We just possibly don't realize it. So it always matters. It's just that the extent to which it makes a difference is becoming even more obvious right now. So this is where I'm also going to bring in some of my coaching experience and the programs that I do with individuals from different walks of life. It is, at the end of the day, people want to be happy. We want to feel good. And that's why we're doing the things that we're doing, right? But sometimes we haven't actually reflected about it to realize that at the end of the day, we want performance so that we can have that sense of achievement, so that we can feel good about ourselves and then feel good. So sort of, putting the, I don't know, the cart before the horse or horse before the cart, or whichever way, sort of changing that. And that requires a little bit of introspection and reflection, which is why I'm saying sometimes I see that come a little later in a workshop or a coaching journey. But when it comes, once the awareness is there, then it's going to take a lot of effort on our part to not heed that awareness of the role of emotions. And there is a step there. There are some mental models and beliefs that we have to sort of almost let go of or climb over. It's like a threshold. But once you do it, there's no going back. So let me give you examples of some of these thresholds or initial mental models or blocks that we might have to get over, okay? So we would have to look at things like the definitions that simple terms like work or performance or job hold in our head. And by definitions, I mean our internal definitions, not how the dictionary defines it. So what is the connection? So what does work mean to me, right? And explore what that is. Because if work means a certain thing to me, and if fun or enjoyment is not a part of that, then I am not, forget about my boss and kid and society. I am not going to give myself the permission to feel happy at work, because when I feel happy, my own brain is telling me, but that's not work. That's not work. You're a kamchu. You're shirky. You're not working. You're having way too much fun. And I will be the one to make sure that I don't have fun at work. So looking at our own internal definitions of work. In fact, when I do longer workshops, like, I do a 3-day workshop for organizations called Leading with Joy. And part of that workshop is actually, we do an exercise called redefining work, which means literally redefining what work means to us. And once you do that, again, it is like a threshold, but once you do that, you won't go back. So maybe I'll give an example to make this very practical. Again, the easiest examples that work for me is me, because I've seen it happen, right? So at one stage, and this was, I've worked in the corporate life and corporate world also. And part of the reason I went on to study the whole field of, the connection between human beings and work is because of my own experiences, because I was not feeling happy at work. I was constantly feeling what we call the Monday morning blues at work, but I was feeling it the whole day. But of course, much later, when I go back and when I look at some of the reasons why I was feeling that way, I realized some of it could have been because of the work, the job, the environment, all of that, the boss, the mismatch, but not much. That's about 10 or 15%. The bulk of it was my inner definitions of work. And at those days, I had mental models of work. And one of, for example, a strong association I had in my own head about work is that work is something that's stressful. Work is something that drains you. And I also did enough introspection to figure out where I picked this up with, so I can share that with you. But we don't always have to do that much of reflection, okay? Just identifying it is very often enough to let it go. But in my case, I picked it up pretty much as a little girl, where, my father used to work at Tata Steel. And when I was a little girl, that was the time he used to work also at the blast furnace, and he used to go every day. So he would be nice, bathed in the morning, and then he would go to work at 7:45 with his nice clothes, come back in the evening covered with soot and very irritated. And so nice, clean Papa goes back, and he comes back looking like a monster, tired, angry, irritated. And as little children, you realize you don't even talk to Papa then. You wait for him to have his bath, have a coffee, become the nice, clean Papa again, and then you approach him. So, and I'm like, this is what work is. And Papa goes to work, right? So work means it's like like your mobile battery charger. You go energized, you come back drained. Next day you go again, you come back drained, and you refresh yourself. And this was part of my system. So what happens now when Ramya grows up and Ramya goes to work? If she has to work and give herself the tick marks of being a good person who goes to office and works like a Papa did, because that's the early definition of work, then she has to come back home tired, drained. and so she has to make sure that she gets drained during the work. It's not like wearing shoes and going to play basketball, which is also something that I did. I played basketball pretty much till a couple of years back, but frankly, basketball is more exhausting. It's more draining physically. But I go, I'm going to have fun, right? So you don't go to work saying, I'm going to have fun if you have a definition in your head that tells you work is supposed to be like that. So really, so when we work with this internal definition of work, this can literally give you that quantum leap in your own experience. It's done that for me. I speak like now when I go to work, I don't feel like I'm going to, I actually come back more energized from work, like I would from a basketball game. So yeah. So
Excellent.
This is, I think, a big roadblock.
No, that was really interesting. And the way you connected it to your own experience. And we initially were talking about how it was often perceived to be not so important. In fact, you are wondering what others would think. And that's why you don't know, even if you're having fun, you don't want to show that you're having fun. But I think the thing that you talked of, which is really giving ourselves the permission. I think it all starts with our own mindset, to give ourselves the permission to have fun. Yeah, I think that was very interesting. Okay. Now, the other thing that I'm also noticing is, I'm also thinking what really limits us. You talked of those limiting beliefs, right? From having joy at work. So one is, of course, giving ourselves permission to do that. The other thing, and I've been, we work quite a bit with senior leaders, very successful at their work. But often I find that while they're very good, getting in results, they're getting results, but not joy. And and there may be a correlation between them, because they're constantly setting the bar very high, extremely high. Okay. Almost knowing fully well right from the start that they're not going to achieve it. Right. That's a given. But they may not achieve 100%. They may achieve 70 or 80%. But instead of celebrating, they're saying, oh, you know what, we just missed it. Next month, let's try harder. So what happens is they're extremely hard on themselves. But the negative effect of that is that culture gets percolated across the company. So while the company may be doing phenomenally well, it kind of robs everybody of the fun of doing that work. Right?
Yeah. So
maybe I don't know. First of all, does this make sense?
Absolutely. No, I've seen this, and I see this every day with my coaching clients as well, right?
Okay.
Okay. So two things here. One is a huge number of us are actually perfectionists without even realizing it. And of course, in the literature, there is a difference between functional perfectionism and dysfunctional, and perfectionists and optimalists, and there's a lot of science there, but I'm just going to give you some things in a nutshell. So when the kind of perfectionism I'm talking about here, which by the way is widely prevalent, okay, and this is that we really want to do things as best as we can. And we have this some kind of airy-fairy, almost fantasy vision of to the best of my potential, okay? And that's what you hear everyone saying, I want to live up to my potential. I want to do the best of my potential.
Yes.
And here's the good news and the bad news. That the good news is that all of us have infinite potential. We do. Anyone who's been alive long enough knows that, right? Of course, we have so many talents. We are infinite beings. We have infinite potential. So when we start putting this thing, like I want to live up to my potential, and we also are taught to measure things in terms of numerator by denominator, right? That's how you track any kind of efficiency. What you achieve versus what you're capable of. And here, what you're capable of is always going to be infinite. Especially if you've started realizing that you are so talented, you have so much potential, you have so many abilities, as most of us do. So, which means the denominator is always going to, just by putting that in the denominator, we're always going to feel dissatisfied no matter what we've achieved. So again, what is the change, or what is the switch that we make here? We don't go down. We don't start doing less. We start doing more when you do this. Okay. And again, I'm speaking from experience here, but we just recognize this definition of efficiency that we've picked up from somewhere as a definition. And we ask, is this working for me? This, what I'm achieving divided by what I'm capable of, which is infinity. And therefore always saying, not good enough, Ramya, you can do more. Not yet good enough. Oh, you can do more. is this working for me? What is this doing to the way I'm feeling about myself and the work that I'm doing? And I'm not here to tell you anything, neither is Suman. So each one of us decides that for ourselves. If you decide that there's a certain insanity associated with it, which I can see the insanity, maybe there'll come a time when others see it as well, then you drop this definition and you start using other measures. Because I know we don't like to give away metrics and measures of measuring our performance because we want to make sure that we're doing well, right? We like measurement. We're all engineers. Most of us have studied engineering at some point, or we have enough engineers around us because of which our brain thinks like engineers. So what do we replace it with? We replace it with some other model. So here's a model that I'm going to give, which is also actually very scientific. It's been tested and it's come from research, which is, think of 3 concentric circles. Okay. In the innermost circle is comfort zone. The next circle is what you call the challenge zone or the stretch zone, not stress, stretch. And the outermost zone is the frustration zone or the anxiety zone or the overwhelm zone. Okay. The self-beating zone, all of that. Now, most of us, we often think that being in the comfort zone is where we are the happiest, where joy is the most. Actually, that's not true. And you can check this by yourself. You can check it with your own experiences. You can look at a 4-year-old. If you have a holiday, you tell the 4-year-old, be comfortable whole day. That's not fun. The 4-year-old wants to go out, do things, experience, challenge himself, right? So it's human nature. That's not where we are the happiest. But there's also research. It's a body of research conducted by Chiscamahi and his colleagues, where he studies the phenomenon of flow, which I'm not going to go into in detail. But basically, when they did experience sampling, which is actually sampling people during their day and saying, what are you doing? How are you feeling? What are you doing? How are you feeling? And then run the regressions. What you find out, what the data shows is that most people actually feel the happiest when they are not in the comfort zone, but in the challenge zone, when they are challenging themselves, stretching themselves, right? But if they challenge themselves and stretch themselves too far, what happens? They go into the frustration zone, the self-beating zone, the stress and anxiety. Now, this is about feelings. Now, where do you think as human beings, where do we perform the best? Again, in the challenge zone. That's why it's called the state of peak performance.
Yeah.
Being in flow. That's the zone. That's where we feel the best. That's where we come fully alive. That's where we perform the best. So we want to keep ourselves and the people we hire and pay to work for us there as leaders. You want your team to be there as well. How do you manage that? You manage that by using emotions as an indicator, right? So if someone's feeling frustrated, stressed, anxiety, they're not in the challenge zone. If someone's, how do you know when you're in the comfort zone, you're just feeling half dead, half alive, you're not challenging. So this is also a model of growth. And if you're worried about yourself not living up to your potential or doing your best, you use this model, you will constantly, I will say best actually. That's what's worked for me. Why? Because when you work in your challenge zone for some time, you're feeling good, you're doing well, guess what happens? You start getting better at what you're doing. Then you start getting bored, right? Then you want the next level. You want to up it to the next challenge. It's like playing a video game. You can't stay at level 1 all the time. It's like doing Sudoku puzzle or playing badminton with a person. Like you get better and better and the person doesn't. You're like, I want someone else. I want someone better to play with because I want to be matched, right? So you yourself increase your challenge. And why you're doing it? Because you're getting bored. So by insisting that you want to be happy, by insisting on joy and using joy as an indicator, you actually make sure that you're constantly pushing yourself. It doesn't feel like pushing. You're challenging yourself to do more and more. And that's how we keep doing more and more. And the satisfaction remains with us and the expansion goes on. So that's the alternate that you can use to the numerator by denominator, which will always make you feel not good enough. If you like to feel not good enough, that's another thing altogether. So.
No, that was a very, very nice analogy. And I like that, so the stretch zone is really where the flow happens and the joy happens, right? And in fact, when you were talking about it, I thought of the video game that I keep playing on my phone, that I'm always wanting to do that one extra level. Mm-hmm. But at some point, if it gets too hard, you tend to give up. I said, ditch it, let's move on to some other game. So, suddenly you lose interest. So
And
yeah, so
that's
I
so
think,
beautiful. No, thank you. And just bring the same analogy to work. So if as a leader, you're concerned about motivating your employees and inspiring, look at this. Suma just gave you the perfect example, right? You keep them in that flow state. You are not doing your external
yeah,
motivation, come to work. They are doing it for themselves. And if you push them into the frustration state, actually, they're not going to be that engaged. They're like, oh, give up, I'll just do it and go home or whatever. So,
it's just too
yeah.
hard.
So,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, and linking to your denominator, essentially, so what you're saying is be focused on the stretch zone or the challenge zone as opposed to the, the bigger circle outside, because that's really your denominator. So don't worry so much about the denominator, but really focus on that. Very interesting. Okay. So I think, I'm just trying to, I really like that thing about what you said of redefining work, right? And while you were talking about that example of your father going to work, and I think that's so very true today, isn't it? In the downturn, suddenly, whether we like it or not, work is getting redefined. Work is no longer a place we go to. We are all sitting at home. So suddenly work is
yes.
not a place, right? It's work is what you do, isn't it? Um,
Yeah.
so any thoughts on that? And, because there is a lot of disruption happening now, and I don't think
Yeah.
just be seen as a speed bump. I think things will things will get altered, structurally changed after things hopefully come back to some sense of normalcy. Um in this new world, do you think joy has a bigger role to play, or is it the same? What's your view on that?
Well, I mean, I would like to believe that joy was always important and will always remain important, irrespective of how the world is changing. But I think in terms of people's awareness,
Hmm.
it's going to become bigger, right? People are going to really insist on why am I doing what I am doing?
Okay.
That's the key question, right? So when we talk of redefining work, one of the tools I use, or exercises rather, that I make participants do in workshops, for example, is doing something called the return on time invested. So this is something that I've picked up from Timothy Galloway. So it's not something I created myself, but I've taken from his work. Where, what do you mean? So, when we invest our money somewhere, we expect a return and we're looking, we're tracking what is the return that I got, right? Just like that, any activity that we do, whether it's going to a movie with friends, whether it's playing sport, whether it is sitting and watching TV, or whether it's going to work, or whether it's sitting at home and working, which we're doing now, we're not going to work, right? We are investing ourselves. We're
Yeah.
investing our time. I also believe we are investing our attention, we're investing our energy, we are investing a part of ourselves. And if we are like, I care about myself, so I care that I'm investing something, and what am I getting back in return? So the early definition of work that most of us were implanted with, and which is, for example, what I used in my early corporate work, was I'm spending so many hours at work, and this is the money that I'm getting.
Right.
And I was very naive. I was fresh out of IIB, where everything we used to see is what's the package, what's the compensation package, which itself is a bad term, bad or whatever. I'll tell you why. Because when people die or when you get hurt, you get compensated, right? So here you're getting compensated for this bad thing that's happening to you. That's work. So we should totally stop change that word compensation. But that's what we rated work with, like a compensation package. And when I left my first job very early, very unhappy. People were asking me, it's such a good job, why are you leaving? And I would say it's not worth it for me. Like 10 hours of my time, I was spending 10 hours of work, and this much of money, not worth it. But again, what's the equation that I'm using inside my head to conclude that it's not worth it? The equation is that the only return is coming as money, which
Yeah.
then I have to use to enjoy and make myself happy and have vacations or something else, right? And that was not worth it. But now I'm inviting people, and I do this for myself, to change that definition. So, for example, today, if you look at my return on time invested at work, what are the returns I'm getting? Okay. And you can put whatever it is that you want based on what you value. So I get an opportunity for self-expression. So you've noticed by now I love speaking. That's why I'm in this profession. Before I got into this profession, I would be like wanting to speak and put fun days to everybody. And, friends and family, they're always like, okay, Ramya, you don't hog all the time. Now in classes, I get to speak and speak and speak and get paid for it, right? So it's a chance for self-expression. It's a chance to discover. It's a chance to learn things. So in my free time, for example, when I was doing my PhD, we used to go to cafes, which were in bookstores. That's how I like to hang around. I'm a nerd. Pick up books and read. Now I get to do that as part of my job, right? So it's a chance to learn. It's a chance to express myself. It's a chance to make a difference. I don't have to go and sort of literally volunteer as an NGO because I do feel like I'm changing lives. I'm changing lives in the work and the coaching that I'm doing. So I feel good about myself. It's my self-esteem. And of course, it's the money that comes in, which I can then spend and use in whichever way I want. So there are many components to this, right? Now, I have a close friend and colleague of mine in academics. When she picks her research projects, she picks them based on who she's going to work with, not so much on the topic, right? I would pick something that excites me, but she'll give more importance to who am I going to work with. Why? Because relationships are very important to her. So I would go to see a movie if I like the movie. She will go to see any movie if she's going with people that she cares and likes about. And that's why each one of us can create our own definition of return. If you're spending your time, attention, energy at work, which is yours and it's precious, what are you getting back? And is that worth it? Is it making sense? So to answer your question, Suman, in the new age that I'm seeing where people are more self-aware, the new generation is like, what will I get in exchange, right? If I'm doing this, what will I get in exchange? They are going to definitely start looking at this. What am I getting in exchange? It has to make sense to them. It could be meaning, it could be purpose, it could be fun, it could be enjoyment, it could be friends, relationships, it could be a brand, it could be opportunity, it could be learning, it could be money, and it could be a combination of all of these. And it could change at different ages and stages in your life, right?
Very well said, Ramya. And one thing that is emerging very clearly is that these two things don't need to pull at each other. So don't think of work as something separate from having fun. You're not getting compensated by money which you will then have fun with. So that's very interesting. And like you tied it right at the beginning to performance. End of the day, at work, we're all trying to enhance performance. But when we do it with joy, it only increases performance rather than lower it. Right?
Mm-hmm.
They're not pulling at each other.
No. Perfect.
Okay, so before we conclude, is there one thing? What is the one thing that you would like to leave our audience with when it comes to embodying joy at work?
I think, Suman, you just did it. That happiness or joy and performance are not pulling at each other.
Right.
That is one thing. And what I would add to it is this whole self component. It's like it's your life, your time, your energy, your attention. You're investing it in doing something. What are you getting out of it? And if you're a leader who's listening to this, because this is all leadership, believe me, each of the persons who's working with you is a human being. And again, for them, it's their life, their investment. What are they getting back? So if you pay attention to that entire spectrum, then when you're literally changing your definition of this whole exchange that's going on. And when you make it more holistic, you actually get more creative. And then you see that you actually have more resources as a leader. You don't only have to use that one danda and that one paycheck that you always used to motivate. You can use many, many other things. And I'm not saying use as in a bad word. It's a win-win. It can bring that person alive, you alive, the work alive, and therefore your entire workplace alive. So this is, at this level, it's not just about individual. Of course, as a leader, you want to do the inner work, but it's about bringing the entire organization alive also.
Awesome. Yeah, we all want to bring our organizations alive. That's a very nice way of putting it. Thank you so much, Ramya. One of the concepts I learned today is return on time invested. And I'm already thinking of that metric. I think the return of time invested right now, what I did in this chat with you is very high. I think it was extremely energizing to have this chat with you. And I'll keep that in mind next time I'm doing whatever I'm doing. Okay. So
thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ramya.